any sort of sign in the heavens, oh yeah, the rapture's coming, blah 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 blah. Yeah, I mean, half the Amazon rainforest has been cut down to produce books about the rapture, and none of them came true. I mean, I've got a whole shelf that is filled with those books that people have either sent me or I used to have, that I keep just as a reminder that, hey, it's never going to happen. So it's like, it won't, you know, but it's all based in a wrong understanding of God's purpose, based in a theology which was a rejection of the Holy Spirit back in the 1820s. You know, the brethren, you know, dispensationalism, millennialism, rapture theology all came from the same source. Zionism all came from the same source. You know, and it's all the fruit of a poisonous tree, sadly. But people buy into it hook, line, and center. And anytime there's any sort of thing that happens in the world, you get all the crazies coming out, you know, sadly. And they're well-meaning, a lot of them, you know, they're deceived, you know, it's a huge deception. Whenever you reject the Holy Spirit, you're opening yourself up for demonic deception. And the whole brethren movement, which was inspired by God for the priesthood of all believers, and so many believers came out of the institutions to look for a more simpler way of engaging house to house, the Holy Spirit fell on them, prophecy, tongues, gifts, in the 1820s, and ultimately they rejected that, some of them, and deception came upon them, and then they needed a theology that explained why the Holy Spirit wasn't for today. Which they came up with dispensationalism and cessationism as part of that, and then along with that, rapture, you know. And then the whole deception of it, Schofield was paid by a Jewish source to promote that, because it so plays into the hands of those who are looking for one world governmental system on earth. All it does, it robs us of our authority to bring the kingdom now, and promotes fear. You know, I mean, there was a lady in the States who killed 2 of her children because she didn't want them to go through the rapture. That was last year, because last year it was supposed to be February the 24th, I think, that the rapture was going to happen. She actually killed 2 children because she did not want them to go through the tribulation. Wow. I mean, that's how deceptive, and she did it out of a genuine heart. I mean, she seriously did not want her children to go through something that is never going to happen. That's how deceptive it was. But it becomes very cult-like, you know, because it's a very controlling thing, you know, which we need to see exposed. You know, more and more people need to be set free from that deception, you know. But people will throw out the rapture, but they'll keep the millennium because they've not yet got to that bit, realizing it came from the same source. Or they'll keep Zionism, not realizing it came from the same source, you know. And that's part of the problem. People are not discerning, and they don't find out. They just believe what they're told, you know. And if you hear it enough, you think it must be true. That's true, you know. And that is the problem. People do believe it because they've been told, and they kept being told. And I was brought up with it, you know. I was in the Brethren Church. You know, I know the roots of it. I did research it. I found all the books of the early Brethren fathers and what they shared and whatever, and how good it was in the beginning. But you could see when it went off, and you could see when deception came in, because the writings changed. The tone of them changed. They became judgmental. The love went out of them. You could see it in just what was written, how it was written. Everything changed from the inspiration that had, you know. And you know, if they had continued, you would have had Azusa Street type things 80 years before it happened. But they rejected it, and it took 80 years for that to come around again and again and again. I mean, the most ironic thing, and this is a huge irony, the Brethren movement do not allow women to speak, and they don't believe in prophecy. Okay. But when the Holy Spirit was moving on that group, a woman called Margaret MacDonald prophesied a vision, and they base the rapture teaching on that prophecy. But they don't believe women can speak, and they don't believe prophecy, but they base the teaching on it and mixed it with a Jesuit priest's teaching and came up with that whole system of belief, which hijacked the seminaries around the world for best part of 100 years. I mean, it's still taught in most seminaries around the world, unless you come from a Reformed. Most of the other seminaries, charismatic seminaries, they all teach it.
Yeah.
Because they totally were hoodwinked by it. You know, and the Schofield Bible, which was commissioned and paid for with an agenda, which wasn't from a Christian, which actually promoted that. And the Schofield was a King James version that had all the notes which related to rapture, the 7 dispensations, all of that stuff, cessationism, all there in all the notes. That was infiltrated the seminaries around the world. And then most of the missionaries teaching and the evangelical movement were actually taught from those seminaries. That's why it's so infiltrated mainstream, because it got in through the seminaries, and then that went out through and basically infiltrated most of the evangelical movement. And it wasn't really until the charismatic movement that started to bring people back to a restored relationship where they could hear God for themselves. People started to question some of those things. When I got baptized in the Spirit in 1986, the first thing God said to me was, you need to understand kingdom and covenant. Well, I thought I knew what kingdom and covenant meant because I'd been brought up in the Brethren movement. That's all they talked about. Kingdom coming 1,000 years after all this stuff. Took me 3 years of going back with God through the Bible, because he just did it. I didn't read another book. I just went through the Bible. He showed me the whole error of all of it and unveiled a whole different view of what is going to happen, which has led me and helped me to come and embrace restoration and everything else. But that was a long time ago. So, you know, and so I already had a lot of deconstruction from futurist eschatology 40 years ago, basically. You know, so now, you know, it's so easy to see how all this works together with what God is doing to restore. Because I didn't have all of that negative stuff, you know. I had to have a lot of demons cast out of me, of those religious spirits. There were. I mean, I had a lot of religious spirits specifically from that movement. Because it was a deceptive movement. It was birthed in God and rejected God for an error. And when you do that, you open yourself up to deception, and they're hugely, and it's had probably the biggest deceptive influence on mainstream Christianity in the last 200 years. A huge deception. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/freedomarc. And we would like to invite you to partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.